All right, ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Domo's Chief Executive Officer, Josh James, and Okta co-founder and COO, Frederic Kerrest.
All right, we'll get right into it. Really excited.
Good morning. Whoa, that was loud.
Wow.
Sorry about that.
Power
I'll try it again. Good morning. How's everyone doing today? You guys got to do a little better. You got to help us out. How's everyone doing today? All right. I'm feeling good now.
So I heard Frederic speak at a venture capital conference I went to, and it was the most entertaining thing I've ever heard in my life. So bar is high today. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do. Co-founder, COO of Okta. Market cap, $9 billion. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here this morning. Okta is an enterprise software company. We focus on a market called identity. We do a couple different things. We help people with their workforce identity. So when you go to the office every morning, you log into applications, making that process very easy and simple and secure. And then we help our customers with their customer identity management. So if you go to JetBlue and you have a TrueBlue number, or you go to the MGM and you log in at Bellagio with an MLife number, we manage all of that identity and information and make it easy and secure for people.
How'd you guys come up with that idea?
We were just out there fishing one day and we're like, what's a good idea? Oh, how about identity?
It's that easy,
It's that easy. And then 10 years later, no, I was much taller and better looking when we got started. My co-founder and I worked previously at a company called Salesforce.com. I started there in 2002. It was a small little company, and Todd worked there with me. And we saw a revolution happening. We saw that people were starting to adopt software as a service and infrastructure as a service, and we thought that there had to be a new way to help companies take advantage of this modern technology, and 10 years later, here we are.
So Salesforce, MIT, you an engineering guy, or are you?
I was. I got a computer science degree. I have not written a line of production code in 18 years, which is probably a great thing for all of our customers.
Have you written other lines of code that didn't make it to production?
I've written no lines of any kind of code in 18 years, which, again, our customers are probably very happy about.
So obviously, this company's doing really well. I mean, creating a company worth $10 billion in 10 years is pretty interesting, something that we all aspire to. You've also got a podcast. Tell us about the podcast and kind of your perspective on barbell.
Yeah, who thinks the world needs another podcast? Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly, thank you. So for all 7 of you, there's a new podcast coming out next week that Josh has been nice enough to come on. It's called Zero to IPO. And the reason we're coming out with this podcast is because I feel it's unfortunate for most of the entrepreneurs in the world that all that the media really likes to talk about is kind of the barbell. Super successful stories. Oh, look at Sergey Brin and Larry Page and Mark Zuckerberg. Or super successful failures. Look at these companies that raised $1 billion and it all went south on them. But no one talks about what happens to most entrepreneurs most of the time. And what happens, and I know because I went through it, is when you start building a company, you go to other events and you meet other entrepreneurs. And what they say, you ask people, how are they doing? And everyone says, I'm crushing it.
Crushing it.
And it seems like everyone is crushing it all the time, except you. And then you go back to your office and you're like, I'm not hitting my numbers. I can't build any software. I can't hire anyone. How am I the only one? And the reality of it is that that's what happens to most people most of the time. So this podcast is, we've got a dozen plus very successful CEO founders of large public software companies, large public technology investors who will come onto the show and talk about their failures.
What are some of the highlights of the failures?
Oh man, there's a ton of them. Mostly me and all my failures, so I'm on there. But we've got Ben Horowitz is on there talking about when he went public with a company called LoudCloud in 2000, 2001. He was on the road for 15 days. The NASDAQ was red all 15 days. His comps got cut in half, and then his wife collapsed while he was on the road. And he was going to run out of cash in 3 weeks if they didn't complete the IPO, for example. And I was like, how is that? He's like, what do you think? Super relaxing. So those are the kind that people look at Ben Horowitz now, or Mark Andreessen, or yourself, or Aneel Bhusri, or Aaron Levy, or Parker Harris, and they say, wow, look at these people. They're so amazing. Everything must have gone perfectly. And the reality of it is they tell stories where things just went abominably south. They couldn't close a customer. The service was going down. It was all, they were running out of cash. What do you do? And it's, hopefully it'll be comforting and encouraging and inspiring for every entrepreneur who's out there being like, everyone else is crushing it, but I'm not. The reality of it is, no one's crushing it. We just look really good because they put makeup on backstage. That's wwhy.
So what about you? Have you had any times when you were crushing it, but it was actually pretty difficult?
Yeah, most of the time.
Most of the time?
Most of the time.
Got any stories for us?
Well, I got plenty of stories. How long do we have? I was told we'll only have like 4 more minutes. Let's see. You know, we're very fortunate. Okta has done well over the last 10 years. It's been a great adventure for the employees, for our investors, for our customers, but there were certainly plenty of dark days. I've got some slides from 2011, 2012 when our projections had us going like this and our revenue was going like that. And we had, you know, top engineers were leaving the company, and I was personally excused or asked to leave 2 board meetings in a row.
That's never a good sign.
It was not a good sign, especially because I was on the board, so that's kind of complicated. It's usually a sign that things are not going very well. And of course, I was like, I'm right, they're wrong. Well, it turned out I was wrong. And I didn't get fired from my own company, so that was good. So yes, there are plenty of times, and you know, it's great when things are going well, and you should take advantage of those and pat yourself on the back and enjoy the experience. But the reality of it is, it's just a lot of, as you know, through all your companies, it's just a lot of hard work and elbow grease, and taking it one day at a time. So
earlier we were talking about, you said there's a lot of companies you see, and they're doing $1 million in revenue, and they're like, how do I get to 20? How do I get to 30? And you said you've talked to a lot of those folks. What is the thing that a lot of times they're missing? What's the thing that they're not seeing?
Yeah. So what Josh is referring to is, we were talking about, hey, what happens when you start an enterprise software company? In particular, I know I'm an enterprise guy. And you can get your first 10 or 20 customers because you know some people that maybe you've sold to in the past, or your investors know some folks. And so you can get kind of a little bit of motion going, and you can get maybe $1 million of sales or $5 million of sales. But how do you get to 50, and how do you get to 100, and how do you get it to 250? And I know, because we went through this again ourselves at Okta early on, we just didn't have the experience. You don't know how to build that repeatable machine. So, you know, there's a lot of things about finding the right pattern and making sure you know that what the stencil looks like, so you can actually start reproducing it and dropping gasoline on it. And that's when things are going well. But before that, just understanding kind of who's the customer, and why are they buying, and how would they buy more, and what's the pattern that you can try and find is something that's pretty complicated. And as Josh mentioned, more and more I'm talking to entrepreneurs who are very, very bright guys and gals, and they have awesome engineering background or product ideas, and they've got those first 20 customers, and they're just looking for someone to help them figure out, what's my sales motion? Like, should I be selling over the phone, or should I be visiting people in person? Who am I selling to? Like, who actually has the money? Who's the executive buyer? Who's got the pain? Like, in the company, who am I really looking for? What kind of companies? Is this a product for pharmaceutical companies? Is it for financial services companies? How do I hire a bunch of inside sales reps and teach them how to do these things over the phone? How do I hire a leader to help manage and grow these people? And I think that there's a huge opportunity to help a lot of entrepreneurs do this. And I think that in the times ahead, certainly, I think that there's ways to start helping more and more entrepreneurs figure out the go-to-market motion. How do you market? How do you sell? How do you service? How do you make them successful? Which I think is a huge opportunity out there. So
how do entrepreneurs find the people that can answer all those questions? It's one thing to come up with a list of questions, and a lot of times it's hard to figure out what those questions are. You know, you just didn't know where to start. When you figure out, I got to figure out what my sales motion is, I got to figure out how to make a repeatable process, who do you call? Do you call your VCs? How do you figure that out?
You can call your fellow entrepreneurs. They're going to tell you they're always crushing it all the time. So I don't know how helpful that's going to be. You should just find a peer group. I mean, find other people who are there with you. You know, make friends. You know, the number one job of an entrepreneur is to sell. You have to become. If you are a salesperson, congratulations. If you're not, you should become one. And why is that? Well, it's because you have to convince everyone all the time. You have to convince people that your crazy idea is one that they should invest in. You have to convince employees that they should leave their super cushy jobs and come join you for your pipe dream. You have to, in my case, convince your significant other that this is a good idea. sweetheart, I promise you it's going to go really well. And you're like, I hope it goes really well. She's like, well, better, because we're going to have kids and they have to go to college. I'm like, that's right. You have to convince customers, right? So, you're going to go out and talk to these enterprises, and they're going to be like, that's great. Who else is using your service? No one. You're going to be the first one, but I promise you it's going to go really, really well. Those are the kinds of things you have to just become natural at. How do you figure out the answer to all those questions? I think there's some trial and error to it. There's probably a little bit of formula to it. And then it's just kind of looking around and seeing what's working for others and just asking a lot of questions and getting some good mentors out there.
What about competition? You guys had a bunch of competitors, and it seems like you've definitely emerged as the big leader. How did you deal with that? You focus on them? You focus on the customer? Is it a combination?
You'd be an awesome financial analyst, because that was like a great 3-part question where all the different parts went a different way, and you said them fast, so I had to remember what the first one was. But I've been training for this. It's like a marathon. So the first thing is, it's tricky with competition. So if you don't have competition, it's like, is it a market? Are you really in a market if there's no competition? And it gets pretty tricky because you're going.
It's a lot easier when you have competitors, that's for sure, in my opinion.
Well, it depends. It might be, but then it's like, how am I going to go and unseat these people who have these relationships with all these enterprise customers? So it's tricky. So first of all, dichotomy. Either you're like, oh, great, there's no competition, in which case you're going to go talk to investors and so forth. They're going to be like, is this a market? Who else is there? There's no even competition slide in your deck. Or you're going to go talk to them and be like, this is a giant market, and the competitors are all terrible, and they're going to be like, well, I don't know about that. Like, you're 2 guys in a trick duck in a garage, and this is like, Oracle you're going to compete with. And you're like, yeah, no problem. I got them covered. So either way, that can be difficult. I do think, so a couple things on how you're going to find the big market you want to go into, because that's a question people always ask. It's like, well, the competition, but what do I do? What do you care about? Like, think about something that, if you're going to start a new business, think about something you're super excited about and you want to be invested in and doing for the next 10 years. And then make sure that that center of gravity also matches like a lot of potential energy, future energy. Like, if there's already 50 startups doing it, you're probably a little bit late. But if there's just a couple and there's a lot of large companies that look like they're moving too slowly, that might be a good center of gravity. But don't focus too much on the competition. It's like racing a car. I don't know, I've never raced a car, but this is an analogy I heard, so I'm going to use it anyway. It's like racing a car. And if you stare at the wall too much as you're going into the curve, you're definitely going to hit the wall, which makes me really want to race cars on like a straightaway, though, without a curve. So I think you have to like pay attention to what the competition is doing, especially when you're going into these entrenched markets, but you got to focus on like why you're different and why you're going to add more value and why you're going to help all these customers be successful.
So every time I've seen you, you've been very on. Very energized.
I just woke up.
How do you come down? What's calm Frederic look like, or is this calm
What
Frederic?
do you mean? This is totally calm Frederic. What's up with that, man? I asked Josh the same question a couple weeks ago, and he's like, I love Mountain Dew. This is a quote. I love Mountain Dew. It makes me feel like a champion. I was like, I should be drinking more Mountain Dew.
So I guess one of the last questions is like keeping yourself engaged. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you could compare Silicon Valley versus what we're trying to do in Silicon Slopes.
I love Silicon Slopes. Huge fan. Congratulations to all of you. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. But, it's what would be your advice to us out here? Like you were telling me about some of the things that you've invested in and the Minibrains, and like there's just not as much of that around here. I hope it gets to that level, but tell us about the Minibrains and what we can do to foster the right ecosystem here.
That's another 2-part question that is going to be super short to answer. What Josh is referring to is I co-founded and I'm on the board of a company that's finding new ways to find cures for central nervous system disease, in particular epilepsy, autism, schizophrenia, which I think are huge problems. I'm not the smart guy. There's 2 PhD professors who are actually the smart guys in the company. And we are actually creating what people like to call mini-brains, organoids, which are using stem cells. You can actually recreate small versions of brains, and then you can test a bunch of drugs on them. This is certainly science fiction. I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of capabilities there. But there's a huge, I think what Josh is referring to, there's a huge innovation engine around that. Like it's something that we're able to do. We're doing it in San Francisco, close to where I live. It's right next to UCSF, so there's a lot of capabilities that are coming out of the research. They're coming out of the facilities there. There's a lot of great PhDs that you can get. But I think the same is true right here. So I am very bullish on the opportunity for the entrepreneurial ecosystem to foster right here in Salt Lake City and in Utah. I've been fortunate over the last 10, 15 years to start to make some great friends like Josh and a number of other entrepreneurs who you've seen here and who I've had the chance to learn from over the years. So I think I would just say keep fostering that entrepreneurial culture, keep building those groups, making sure that everyone has close ties to the universities, and I think the investment's going to come, and I'm very, very excited for what's ahead. So.
Cool. Let's get a big round of applause.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
Thanks, man.
big round of applause. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Frederic.